Hi there, hope you're having a pleasant day wherever you may be. Right now, I'm at the Atlantic City of the West. If it was like 1914, I'm at Bayocean, Oregon. Bayocean is located on the Oregon coast, about 10 or so miles outside of the town of Tillamook. Yeah, that Tillamook, the cheese one. So, what is Bayocean? What's going on here? Well, the short answer is absolutely nothing. It's completely gone. There's nothing left but memories. As for the story, it's kind of an interesting one. In 1906, T.I. Potter, the son of a real estate developer named T.B. Potter from Kansas City, convinced his father to purchase this narrow peninsula of land along the Oregon coast on the western edge of Tillamook Bay. Now, they decided to call it Bayocean because on one side was the bay, the other side was the ocean. Makes sense, right? His plan was to develop it into a resort here on the western coast, much akin to those found on the eastern seaboard. He wanted it to be the Atlantic City of the West. Once they bought up the property, they quickly started to develop it with enough to promote it. And being real estate developers, they were good at that. The first person to purchase land here was a gentleman named Francis B. Mitchell, who he fell in love with the concept. He loved the dream that was Bayocean. Now, early on, things were looking really good for the town. They had a lot of investors. I believe they had close to 2,000 people that bought plots of land and were building houses and things. They had a lot of amenities, including running water, electricity. They had various features like something called a natatorium, which had a heated saltwater pool in it. There was a bowling alley. There was a post office. There was even a railroad here. So this had a lot of great things that some towns, some regular towns didn't even have, let alone resort towns. So despite all the success, the West was still kind of wild back then, and there was no road that connected Bayocean to the rest of the country. So what the Potters did was they built a large boat that would transport people from Portland out the mouth of the Columbia River, down the Pacific coast, and here into Tillamook Bay, where they can bring their guests and people that had property here. Now, that process wasn't always smooth. The waters from the Columbia meeting the Pacific are notoriously rough, and even coming into the Tillamook Bay, the water was kind of rough. So there were often long delays, and even when they did get the boat going, you had all these well-to-do people hanging on for dear life sometimes, getting sick, getting wet. It was just not the most efficient process to get people down here. Now, there wasn't much they could do about the Columbia, but there was something they could do about the entrance to Tillamook Bay. It was determined that the solution of the problem would be to build a jetty. So they enlisted the Army Corps of Engineers to lay out a plan. They did for a two-jetty system here at a cost of about $2 million, which the townspeople would have to come up with half of. They didn't like that idea, and they voted against it and asked to have only one jetty built instead. So at a cost of about $800,000, that's what they built, the North Jetty. Now, when it comes to jetties, one is not better than zero. Unfortunately, building only the one jetty created some irregular erosional patterns, and the sandy peninsula was slowly being eroded away to the point where it was affecting buildings. With the writing on the wall, the Potters ultimately abandoned their investment in the town, and people began to realize that things weren't looking good in the long run. So slowly but surely, by the mid-20s, the town was beginning its steep decline. By the early 1930s, the fabled natatorium eventually succumbed to the waves and collapsed because of the erosion, along with many houses, many other buildings. And that, combined with the stock market crash in '29, where people weren't really vacationing and things like that, the place was hemorrhaging residents. Now, even with all this happening, with the town crumbling under its own weight, one man was still clinging to the dream, Francis Mitchell. He would not let it go. Even though he was a man of modest means, he wasn't exactly like a super wealthy guy. He had invested his entire life into Bayocean, and he was not going to let it go easily. And he continued to try to rebuild roads and things like that that were being washed away. Even though it was largely a one-man effort, literally, he would not stop. By the 1940s, everything was pretty much done. And Francis Mitchell was left clinging to the scraps of the town. And in the early 50s, a storm broke through the peninsula, officially turning it into an island, completely cut off from the rest of the world. By that time, a road had been built, but the road was long gone. Once the water broke through, it began to dramatically affect nearby Tillamook Bay. And the decision was made to, instead of building the South Jetty, they decided to build a breakwater that ultimately kept the water from flowing in. But by that time, the fate was sealed for Bayocean. As for Francis B. Mitchell, he pretty much spent up to his dying days trying to save this dream. His wife passed away in 1953 of a stroke. Shortly thereafter, he was mandated by the state to be put into a hospital where he eventually died at the age of 95, with his dream having crumbled. At the time of his death, there were like 2 buildings left that just a few short years later, those had all been washed away into the sea. At first, you'd think that the story of the potters would be the defining sadness of this story of Bayocean, but in reality, it's F.B. Mitchell. You know, this man so consumed with this idea that wasn't even his. You know, he just kind of liked it and latched onto it, and it ended up being his dying days. Now, as far as visiting Bayocean, like I said, there's nothing left. There's allegedly there might be some artifacts buried in the sand, but on the surface there's nothing. You do have a very nice beach, I will say. It's a gorgeous beach. Seems kind of isolated because as I'm walking down here, especially the further I got here toward the jetty, which was a long walk by the way, there were less and less people. And this is Labor Day weekend on a Saturday, so nice spot, I would say. So if you were to come visit, it would be for the scenery. And I think that's what most people come here for, the secluded beach, the scenery. I don't think most people even realize that there was a resort town here for the early part of the 20th century. I mean, there is a sign at the turnoff to come in here that tells the story of the town, but how many people stop to read that, right? Well, wouldn't you know it, on my way back, I thought there was really nothing here at all. But there is a Bayocean townsite trail. This sign marks the townsite, and there's a couple of little spots that mark, like one marks where the hotel is, one marks where a store was, and they're supposed to have a little thing, that little white thing is supposed to have some like reading material in it, but so far of the 3 that I tried, only one of them, the one at the hotel, had some laminated papers with pictures and things like that, but it's getting dark. I didn't have time to read it all because I kind of got to get out of here. But now, sure, finding the townsite trail is cool, but it doesn't change the fact that there's still nothing here. Now, I'm sure if you were to dig through all this foliage, you might find some artifacts, but in terms of on a practical level, there's still nothing of the town left. If you're curious to find the trail from the parking lot, take the dirt road. Don't take the trail to the beach right away like I did. Eventually you'll see the sign for the townsite trail and just follow that and you'll be at the location. Well, that does it for this one. Thanks for joining me on this trip to Bayocean, Oregon. I'm sorry there isn't really much to actually show you that's tangible. I came on this one knowing that actually. That's why I decided to make the long walk down to the jetty because at least the jetty is something tangible, the north one at least, in relation to the town. Sort of an element of its demise really. So I figured that was interesting enough, and the scenery was great too. So with that said, I hope you enjoyed it, hope you learned a little something, and maybe it'll encourage you to just come check out this stretch of beach. Like I said, it's a nice little area that doesn't have a lot of people. So with that said, I guess I'll see you on the next one. Oh yeah, In 1979, the Army Corps finished the South Jetty, and what do you know, just a few short years later, the peninsula was restored. Who'd have thought, huh?